processed foods versus not processed foods, whole foods versus not. I know I'm supposed to eat more whole foods. That's processed. Is that bad? Is that good? Should I be having it? Should I not be having it? We had a woman who was having a protein bar every day, almost every other day, right? And was really struggling with bloating, really struggling with that. And we pulled the protein bars out of her diet as well as some of her protein powders. And then all of a sudden, inflammation went down, bloating was down. Those ultra processed foods that can actually bypass our natural satiety signals. So we don't get the fullness cues like we would if we were, having this as a whole food. And this is where that hyperpalatability comes into play, and it makes it really easy to overeat. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Metabolism and Menopause podcast. My name is Stephanie, and I am your host and CEO of Vitality OET. We are a women's nutrition, health, and fitness coaching company that focuses predominantly on women's hormones, particularly as they start going through perimenopause and onwards. We know that you start experiencing so many changes in this time of your life, whether it's the hot flashes, night sweats, irritability, brain fog, or waking around the middle. That seems to have come out of absolutely nowhere, despite you not changing anything. So you go back to those tried and true methods of cutting calories, cutting carbs, doing a bunch of cardio, yet it feels like nothing is working. You are putting in all this effort and you are just moving backwards. But we know now that your body is inherently different now that you've gone through these hormonal changes. So our mission here at Vitality is to really help you understand how your body changes in this time of your life, so you can reach those health and fitness goals, feel in control and at home in your body again, live a life full of vitality, and really understand how to take care of this new body of yours. So today I want to get really tactical because I've had a lot of questions of women asking, okay, processed foods versus not processed foods, whole foods versus not. I know I'm supposed to eat more whole foods, but what about yogurt? Like, that's processed. Is that bad? Is that good? Should I be having it? Should I not be having it? And so I want to really explain to you what food processing is, where the benefits are of processed foods versus whole foods, what that actually means, how it's going to pertain to your ability to be able to lose weight, calories that your body will actually absorb, and just really get into the nitty-gritty of where to have them, because you can actually have both and you should. And so what is, first of all, food processing? Basically, it's just any method that is used to transform raw ingredients into a form that is more edible, longer lasting, or, more tasty, like potato chips, right? Or maybe it's even more convenient, right? Easy to grab and go. And of course, the term processing is going to include a wide spectrum of different techniques. Some things is going to be easy as washing, freezing, and chopping. Maybe there's more intensive industrial methods, right? Like refining, adding those preservatives to help, support that shelf life, incorporating artificial flavors and colorings to make it look better. So the extent of processing is significantly going to affect the nutritional quality of the final product, how much we can absorb, how hard it is to digest, inflammation, a whole bunch of things. And so there are actually four main categories of food processing. And the first one is going to be our unprocessed or minimally processed foods. This is what we typically like to talk about in terms of your whole foods. These are foods that are close to their natural form and may have gone, minimal processing and changing. This is like, washing, freezing, cutting, or fermenting. This is without adding substances to try and preserve it as longer, right? So we're talking about things like rices. We're talking about things like your fresh fruits, your veggies, raw nuts, plain yogurts, beans, lentils, whole frozen foods, meats. So for example, if you're going to do chopped avocados that are frozen, those have probably just been washed, cut up, and then frozen, right? Very minimally processed. This is our whole foods. Then we have the second category, which is processed ingredients. So these are substances that are going to be extracted from your whole foods and used in cooking to help prepare meals. So this is going to be things like your oils. This is going to be things like sugars and salt and flour. They are not typically consumed alone, right? You're not just going to take a handful of flour. That's not very great. But alone, you're not going to have them alone. But together, they can help with those home prepared cooked dishes that are going to be mostly whole foods. Then we have the next category, which is processed foods. And these are foods that are made by adding ingredients like salt, oil, sugar to whole foods to help preserve them or enhance that flavor. They still resemble the original food in structure and content. So for example, canned beans. It's processed, there's things to help it be preserved, but the beans are pretty much beans, right? Things like cheeses and smoked fish, freshly baked breads from home, right? Used whole ingredients, marinated meats, things like that. And then the last one is our ultra processed foods. And these are foods that are highly engineered from mostly food extracts, refined starches, added sugars, industrial additives, and they often contain little to no whole foods. They are designed for taste, they are designed for convenience, and a long shelf life. So examples that we typically think of when we're thinking of this is, the chips, the sodas, the packaged snacks, the boxed cereals, many fast food items. But in this category is also the keto breads, the low-carb tortillas. We have our, protein bars. These are highly processed and made of lots of engineered and industrial additives, right? They're not whole food based. We don't see the whole foods in them. So let's talk about the impacts of food processing on our bodies specifically. And I'm going to talk about like the health foods versus the non-health foods, right? Because we all think like, oh, the keto wrap must be better than the regular wrap. And I did this in an email once. I compared just a brown whole grain Dempster's tortilla to a classic low carb keto type wrap. There was less ingredients with the Dempster's tortilla. It actually had less calories. It had more natural fibers. The ingredients were more whole food ingredients. There was less additives. And so what we found was actually calorie-wise, they were exactly the same. The tortilla, the Dempster one, actually may have been lower calorie because what the low-carb breads do is they minus the fibers from the total calorie count. So you're actually consuming a lot more calories than you think because you can actually digest the calories from fiber, which is how they get around things on food labels, which is not great. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So what are the impacts of food processing on digestibility, first of all? And I think this is a really big one because processing is going to influence how easily a food is digested. So on one hand, processes like cooking, blending, grinding is going to help food be more digestible by breaking down some of those plant fibers and cell walls, making the nutrients more accessible to the body. So for example, cooked veggies are typically easier to digest than raw ones. A lot of people tend to have bloating when they have lots of raw veggies, and this is because it's harder to break down those plant fibers and things like that. So when we're having steamed veggies, roasted veggies, our body can typically break it down a lot easier and actually absorb those nutrients more readily. However, on the other side of things, we have excessive processing, especially in the case of those ultra-processed foods that can make foods very easy to digest. It is absorbed very quickly into our body. And what happens when it's very fast like that is that it can actually bypass our natural satiety signals. So we don't get the fullness cues like we would if we were, having this as a whole food. And this is where that hyperpalatability comes into play, and it makes it really easy to overeat. So this rapid digestion can really lead to overconsumption. We also see when this rapid absorption happens, we start to struggle with our blood sugar as well. So we have more blood sugar spikes. We start seeing the crashes that come later. So this is the classic baked potato versus chips analogy. So if you ate the same amount of potatoes in a baked potato versus potato chip, you could eat probably like 5 potatoes worth of potato chips very easily. Easy to digest, easy to snack on. You wouldn't feel very full. If you tried to eat 5 baked potatoes, you would hardly get through one because it's very filling. It's harder to break down. It takes longer to absorb. It takes longer to digest and empty our stomach. We get that fullness cue. And this also happens with those health foods, right, that we all tend to think are so much better for us. When sometimes when we're relying on those too much, this is what we're seeing. We don't get full as quickly. We are going to see more struggles with blood sugar. It's absorbed more quickly into our body. And that's not necessarily a good thing, right? And so the effect can be way more pronounced in women during hormonal sensitive times, like perimenopause, like menopause, like postpartum, even certain phases of our menstrual cycle where our insulin resistance is going to go up because we're struggling with like estrogen declining, for example. And so if we're having more highly palatable foods during this time, we get even worse blood sugar control than we did before, compared to, if we were having chips prior to these hormonal changes versus now. And this is where we can see a lot of weight gain, right? Where our body, when our insulin is up, if you would have listened to the insulin resistance episode, I did around like episode 195-ish, you will see like when insulin stays high or is high all the time, or we have these massive spikes, it actually blocks fat burning. It turns on our storage pathway. And so this is something that we need to be really aware of, because sometimes we think we're eating really well. I only eat health foods, right? I eat really clean. But then we realize the kind of tortillas that we're having and the kinds of breads that we're having and the snacks that we're having and, the little packaged, little keto chocolate things and stuff like that, they're actually super highly processed, right? And so we're going to see digestion goes very quickly and we don't feel as full. The next one I want to talk about is calorie absorption, and this is a big one. So food processing can actually increase the number of calories that our body absorbs. Whole foods, because of the fiber content that they have and their structural integrity, tend to cause you to absorb fewer calories during digestion because our body has to work much harder to break it down. So this is the classic, like when we're comparing protein to carbs and fat. If you eat 100 calories from carbs, 100 calories from fat, you burn about 5 to 15 calories during digestion, during the breaking down process, because obviously it takes energy to digest. If you have 100 calories of protein, your body actually burns like 30 to 35 calories instead. So that's a big difference. So you could eat the same amount of calories, but have a higher calorie outside of the equation just by eating more protein. This also happens when we have more fiber, but this also happens when we have more whole foods versus processed foods. And so you could have the same perfect calories in 2 days, this exact same macros, but if you have more processed foods, you have less fiber, you have less protein one day versus higher the next, the day that you have fewer of those whole foods, you will burn less calories. So the calories in versus calories out is actually going to be smaller versus the day that you have more whole foods, more fiber, more protein. And so we need to be aware that when we are, for example, let's talk about peanut butter. Like if you are having some peanuts versus a tablespoon of peanut butter, you're probably going to absorb more calories from the peanut butter because it's already broken down, right? Compared to just having peanuts on its own. But in contrast, processed and ultra processed foods are going to be digested very, very quickly, right? So we can absorb more of those nutrients with less effort. And this can actually be really great for people who have a lot of gut inflammation, who need readily available energy sources around their workouts, for example. And so this is where, if we have someone that's really struggling with their gut health, or because if your gut lining is inflamed, our body can't absorb as much already. So we want to make it as easy as possible for our body to absorb the nutrients that we need to help fuel your body to help you heal. So this might be where we start like utilizing smoothies more. We're going to, break down the veggies and the fruit in that smoothie. So when you drink it, your body can absorb those nutrients better. Because if you think about it, if you were to eat all the things that are in a smoothie, in a bowl, and there's like veggies in there, there's fruit in there, there's some yogurt in there, you're probably going to be really flippin' full by the time you're halfway through that, right? Whereas a smoothie, you can down it pretty quickly. And so this is where understanding where to utilize these is really important. So if you're in a fat loss phase and we know that you are going to be hungrier because we're decreasing your calories a bit, you're not going to want to utilize smoothies because you're going to absorb that very quickly. And you're also going to have that energy like digest very quickly as well, right? So you're going to be hungry sooner. If we have more volume, it's going to take more energy to digest, which is going to burn more calories. It's also going to keep you full longer. So understanding where to utilize processed versus unprocessed foods is really important in this journey as well. And if we eat a lot of hyper-processed foods, this is protein bars, this is chips and chocolate and gummy bears and all those things, we can see that this is a lot more significant. And so what ends up happening is over time, we end up like over-consuming calories without even realizing it because our body can absorb it more quickly. So that's something to watch out for. Next, we have inflammation. This is a really, really big one. Ultra-processed foods are consistently associated with elevated markers of inflammation and poor metabolic health. Why is that? Well, these effects are going to be driven by several different factors, including high levels of refined sugars and oils, low fiber content, the presence of chemical additives and preservatives that can actually really disrupt your gut health and lead to potential gut inflammation too. And the processing methods that involve high temperatures can also sometimes lead to the formation of compounds, which can actually increase oxidative stress and inflammation in our bodies when we consume them. And we are way more vulnerable to the effects of inflammation in the menopause transition. If our estrogen starts to decline, inflammation naturally starts to come up because one of estrogen's roles is to keep inflammation down. And so if we're having these, foods that are irritating us and causing more inflammation, what happens is we see worse menopausal symptoms. We see more low energy. We see more bloating, mood changes, insulin resistance. And this is because when inflammation is high, it's harder for food to get into the cells. Everything's kind of sluggish. That's going to lead to more inflammation itself. When food can't get into cells, we see more insulin resistance, and it becomes this vicious cycle. And so what we need to be aware of too is when our inflammation goes up, it blocks your fat burning pathway and it overstimulates your growth and storage pathway. And when we're stuck in that growth and storage pathway, our body is told we have enough, let's store, despite the fact that you're eating less and moving more. So your body is told to store despite eating less, just because inflammation goes up. And so for myself, I find that I have to be so careful. There are literally 3 brands of protein bars that I can have. And the reason for this is, one, I am super sensitive to sugar alcohols. They blow me up super quick. Like I get bloated, I get nauseous, I get a headache, I feel very swollen. Like my body, it gets inflamed very quickly. I also know that with protein bars, the fake fiber in them crush my gut because, fiber comes from carbohydrates. And so if something is quoted as low carb or doesn't have much carbohydrate in it, but has a lot of fiber, that's a really big red flag because all those fibers are not occurring naturally. It's not from whole grains that are in there, right? It's not coming from fruits and veggies. It's not coming from oats and rice and things like that. It's coming from something that's really highly processed. And a lot of people really struggle with those fake fibers, myself included. And so this is where paying attention to that can make a big difference. Like we had a woman who was, having a protein bar every day, almost every other day, right? Depending on the week, but she would rely on them a lot and was really struggling with bloating, really struggling with that. And we pulled the protein bars out of her diet as well as some of her protein powders. And then all of a sudden, inflammation went down, bloating was down inches just because of the inflammatory response, because we know that if inflammation is high, fat burning pathways are blocked. If we can lower inflammation, it allows the fat burning pathways to open, and then your body will allow you to release fat, which is what we want. So sometimes we get so caught up in wanting these like fancy health type foods, the like keto breads and the low carb wraps. And sometimes all those things can actually be working against us and we don't even realize it. Plus just getting like a good whole grain option is also cheaper and typically better on our gut as well. Then we want to talk about fat loss specifically because yes, sometimes it can make a big difference. Highly processed foods tend to work against fat loss. They are usually less satiating, so we're hungry more often. They're very easy to overeat, right? I don't know about you guys, but we had like a bowl of Reese's Eggies, those chocolate peanut butter Eggies. They're so good. And every time you walked by the counter, it's very easy. I could just stand there and eat the whole bag, right? If I was having like peanuts and stuff, I wouldn't be eating that much, right? So we have to know that it's going to be really easy to overeat those things without feeling full. They have a low thermic effect of food. They don't burn a lot of calories during digestion. So then we're consuming more of those calories as well, right? And they're typically very calorie dense with low volume, which again makes portion control very challenging. When's the last time you had like 3 little gummy bears, right? Like usually we're having a lot more than that. So frequent consumption of these ultra-processed foods are going to lead to those disruptions in hunger and fullness hormones like leptin, ghrelin, insulin, and these disruptions can increase your cravings, reduce your energy expenditure, making it much more difficult to maintain a fat loss phase or even tracking accurately, especially when we're dealing with hormone-related conditions like insulin resistance, estrogen dominance, thyroid imbalances, PCOS. It makes everything a bit more challenging, and this will just really throw a wrench in things for you. And I just want you to remember that there's a bell curve to everything in life. So you don't want to be super extreme with avoiding processed foods, thinking, that's going to be the be all end all. And like, don't get over stressed out, over cutting things out, because if you're super stressed out, that's just going to raise your cortisol, raise your inflammation, block your fat burning pathways, lower your hormones, disrupt your sleep. We don't want that. And so we just want to make sure that we are trying to eat whole foods wherever we can, right? We're focusing on adding in versus taking out. So in general, right, we're going to know that whole foods are typically going to be better than your processed foods, right? But I want to remind you that all foods have value. There is no good food. There is no bad food. There is no unhealthy. There is no healthy. There is just some that have more fiber, some that have less fiber, some that are more nutrient dense, less nutrient dense, more calorie dense, less calorie dense, right? So some have more protein, some have less protein. There are pros and cons to everything, and you need to mix it up, right? Because that's part of being realistic and being able to maintain this long term as well. And so for myself, I love donuts. Absolutely love donuts. They are like my favorite dessert ever, although the local donut shop that I go to has these sourdough bagels. They are like a cheddar garlic deliciousness. And then I have it with a dill pickle cream cheese. And now if I go to that donut shop, like I am more likely to get a bagel than that donut because it is like life-changing bagel. Amazing. Shout out to Everyday Kitchen. Amazing. So anyways, when I go out, I will be mindful when I have them. Pay attention to how I'm having them, right? If I'm going to have a very calorie dense, carb heavy treat, like a donut, I'm going to have it right after a meal so my blood sugar is not going to spike as much. Maybe I'll go for a walk afterwards to help support my blood sugar, right? Like there are ways to enjoy these things that aren't detrimental to your health. It's just you don't want to be consuming them the majority of the time. And so let's discuss some reasons why whole foods can typically benefit us more. Nutrient density. Obviously, whole foods have all their natural nutrients. Things aren't being stripped away. We get all the vitamins, all the minerals, the fibers, the antioxidants, all the plant compounds, and those are typically taken away during processing. And these nutrients work together to support our immune function, energy production, hormone balance, overall cellular health. And so this is where, if we're having an orange versus orange juice, even if it's freshly squeezed, we're losing some of those fibers. We're losing some of the important stuff in there versus that orange juice. Plus, again, very easy to overconsume orange juice as opposed to eating 12 oranges, right? Then the natural fiber content. We know how crucial fiber is to our health. It plays a key role in our digestion, blood sugar regulation, our gut health, lowering cholesterol levels, helping support estrogen in our body. It helps slow down the absorption of our sugars, keeps you full longer. It feeds all that good gut bacteria that keeps us, less inflamed, less bloated. The more processed the foods are, the lower the fiber, or they're pumped again with those really fake fibers that I talked about already that don't offer the same benefits and can actually make things a lot worse. We know whole foods are going to be having fewer additives, right? They have fewer preservatives, fewer artificial sweeteners, emulsifiers, and other additives that can disrupt your gut microbiome. It can increase inflammation and alter your satiety signals as well, so it's easier to overeat, and we don't want that. And then also we know it's going to help with better blood sugar control and energy regulation, which we know is something we all struggle with in perimenopause. We're tired all the freaking time. We have the energy crashes. Sometimes even meals we're exhausted, even though you should be energized from your meals. All of a sudden we go to the doctor and our A1C is crap, even though we didn't change anything. And so whole foods, we know we're going to digest way more slowly and more steadily. You eat, it's going to increase slightly, it's going to maintain, and it's going to come back down. That's what we want. If we are having these highly processed foods, even those health foods, right, we're going to see it spike and it's going to drop. And we don't want that because then we're going to have that craving, that energy crash. We know that we're going to have way more insulin coming in when that blood sugars spike. That's going to block your fat burning pathways. We're going to see more inflammation, more stress on our body, and that does not lead to fat loss. So this is why we encourage having a slow digesting carbs where you are able. So we're having whole grain breads, whole grain pastas, oats, quinoa, your potatoes, all other veggies, all your fruits. They are all so key in making sure that we are supporting our blood sugar. We just want to make sure we're not having carbs on their own. We want to make sure we're having some of our protein and veggies first to help stabilize blood sugars so that our stomach empties more slowly so we're not having that spike. So if you're having a sandwich, have like some veggies and dip first. Have a little bit of a side salad. Have a hard-boiled egg. Then dip into your sandwich, right? If you're having meat and broccoli and potatoes, have some of your broccoli and your meat first and then have your potatoes. We don't have to overcomplicate it. We don't have to take things out. Then we also know that whole foods are going to help support our hormone balance. Many nutrients found in whole foods, like our magnesium, our B vitamins, omega-3s, antioxidants, they are all directly involved in hormone synthesis, so producing our hormones, detoxification, so that way our body can detox properly and it's not just pushed into fat cells, which then changes the structure of your fat cells, making them harder to break down, making fat loss even harder. We don't want that. So we want to make sure we're having good detoxification, that our body is like communicating properly. And processed foods over time are going to lack those nutrients in your body. You're not going to get what you need. And that can actually contribute to the hormonal imbalances that you're experiencing. Definitely not good during perimenopause and menopause. And then obviously increasing satiety and appetite, right? Whole foods take longer to chew and digest. Like how quick is it to like chew and digest a potato chip versus some roasted potatoes? Smoothie or ice cream versus like some cheese, right? Like we need to make sure that we are able to eat more slowly. So we're getting those hunger and fullness cues a lot more accurately. And a lot of the time we're just always snacking on things that are quite easy to digest and chew and get rid of. And then we struggle, right? And we don't want that. That's not what we want from our food. So what kind of balance should we aim for? Because like I said, you don't have to cut out processed foods completely, right? The goal is not to avoid them all. Some processing can be practical, healthy, or even necessary, like sometimes traveling and stuff, right? Like having a little snack or a protein bar in those cases can be helpful in giving you some options to help you reach your goals. But the key is knowing the difference between helpful processing and ultra processing that we might want to avoid more, right? We want to find that sustainable balance. There is a bell curve to everything. Too much or too little of the same thing can have negative effects. Too little fiber, not good. Too much fiber, also not good. Both will have you bloated and constipated. Not a good place to be. Both are going to lead to more inflammation. So this is where we need to understand that there's a happy medium with stuff. We don't have to be extreme. So when we're looking at whole and minimally processed foods, you want to aim for like 80 to 90%. These should form the foundation of the majority of your meals. Veggies, fruits, whole grains, legumes, your lean meats, nuts, seeds, eggs, fermented foods, and clean dairy. Then for 10 to 20% of the time, we can have processed or enjoyment foods. This is stuff like packaged hummus, canned tuna, dark chocolate, crackers, some baked goods, even a treat meal out, right? Your protein bars. These foods can add convenience, they can add enjoyment, or even cultural relevance, and it doesn't have to sabotage health goals or adding extra inflammation. So some examples of like balanced choices. Maybe we're swapping processed granolas or cereals for oats with fruits and nuts. Maybe we're trading soda for sparkling water with some citrus, right? Choosing plain yogurt and using honey and some berries to sweeten it up instead of buying the flavored stuff at the store. Using minimally processed condiments like mustard, tahini, and salsa instead of some of the sugary sauces that you might find, like sweet and sour sauces, right? Include frozen vegetables and canned beans and pre-chopped produce to save you time without compromising on quality. And then aiming for whole protein sources over, protein bars and Pop-Tarts and the protein pancakes and all the keto bars and all those kinds of things, right? So the degree of processing can significantly impact our health. Absolutely, in terms of digestibility, calorie absorption, inflammation, fat loss, satiety signals. But remember, processed foods will always have a time and place. So keep in mind that whole and minimally processed foods are generally going to support your digestion better, reduce the number of calories that are absorbed, lower your inflammation, help regulate your appetite and metabolism, support your hormones and hormonal symptoms. And ultra processed foods are typically going to have the opposite effect, making things a little bit more challenging for you, right? So choosing less processed foods more often can be a very powerful strategy for improving long-term health and achieving your body composition goals. An exercise that we like to do with our clients a lot is we put columns. We put whole foods, minimally processed foods, and then highly processed foods. And you go through your diary, just pick a random day, and you check off every time something's like moderately processed, highly processed, or whole foods. And sometimes it can be surprising because we think that we are eating mostly whole foods. And then when we look, it's like, oh man, when I look at the end of the day, how many check marks do I have in each column? It doesn't look like 80% or 90% whole foods. And so this can be really eye-opening, and I really recommend that you do it because we do this with clients all the time because sometimes, we don't know until we actually sit down and look at it. We don't know until we measure it. Like we think we're getting high protein, and then we look back over the weekends like, wow, I didn't hit my protein goal once. But I keep just saying, I'll try again tomorrow, I'll try again tomorrow, I'll try again tomorrow, and I never get there. Same with the whole foods. It's like, oh, I think I eat mostly whole foods. I'll do better tomorrow. I'll do better tomorrow. I'll do better tomorrow. And the next thing you know, it's been 6 months and you've had no changes, but it's because you're only having 60% of whole foods versus 80 to 90%. And so I highly recommend you sit down, try that exercise and see how it goes, because this is one of the things that's super eye-opening for clients. And when they start seeing this and learning where they can make swaps and still enjoy the treats every so often and not feel deprived, we see massive changes in their motivation, their whole thought process around food, and they have food freedom. They're not like worrying about food choices as much because now they're aware, they've made some swaps, they've learned what their staples are, and they're good to go. And so I hope you found this helpful. I hope this cleared up some of the confusion that you might have. Make sure to follow and subscribe, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.